Professor Kylie O'Brien, and I'd like to welcome you to our Considering Cannabis podcast, which is an ICCM production. So the ICCM, or the International College of Cannabinoid Medicine, is an education platform for healthcare practitioners focused firmly on medicinal cannabis, and it's evidence-based in treating a range of different conditions. So if you're interested, you can sign up to our free foundation course, www.iccm.co, and have a look at what we've got on offer for you. So my guest today is Dr. Michael Geci, who's an MD. Now, Michael is an emergency medicine physician as well as an integrative medicine doctor in the US, and he received his medical degree from the Georgia School of Medicine. Now, he's also written a book on medicinal cannabis, and it's called Pot Doc. So, Michael, I want to talk to you today about the regulations around cannabis in the US. But before we do that, I'm really interested to know how you got interested in medicinal cannabis and what made you write a book on it.
Oh, that's a question I typically answer. You should read the book because it's all clearly defined.
I will read the book.
I think it's the first chapter, maybe even the first paragraph. At the end of it, I say that I stumbled onto cannabis and cannabis stumbled onto me. I didn't ever have any kind of notion that I was going to get into medical cannabis. It was sort of a random course of events where I met a woman who lived in a legal state, and she told me that it was a legal state, and I'm like, what's a legal state? And then it just kind of went from there. But I was in a sort of a place in my life of transition, and decided I wanted to I was in Montana, and for anyone who's ever been to Montana or seen pictures of Western Montana, I mean, it's quite beautiful, and it was a place that seemed to invigorate me, and and I just decided that I was going to start a clinic there because it was a warm and friendly environment, and that's kind of what I needed at the time. And when I set up the clinic and people heard that I was doing alternative / integrative medicine, people started calling and saying, will you evaluate people for medical cannabis? Or, there they called it medical marijuana. And I said, well, let me check into it and see. And I started to research, like I went to PubMed to see what's up with medical marijuana. And I was gobsmacked by the amount of data that was out there. And so I started seeing patients, and, in the United States, each state has different laws, even though it's legal federally. States have sort of, jettisoned themselves from that and said, well, this is our state, and this is part of our medical practice, and medical practices are assigned to state law. And and so I just started to see patients and realized that there was really something important there. I mean, I like I said, I was flabbergasted by the amount of data that had been, that was in print that I didn't know about. I mean, not that I'm like the the person that keeps up on all the literature, but I mean, this was astounding to me that in 2009, when this story first started, I had no idea what the endocannabinoid system was. It had been discovered after I graduated from medical school. So that's sort of in a nutshell how I got into it. So
So you touched on something a minute ago, the inconsistency or consistency between federal and cannabis laws and state or province laws. Can you talk a little bit more about that for people outside the US who may not understand what the regulations are in the US?
Yeah, and actually for people in the United States, they probably don't understand it either. But uh, so federal law, I mean, I'm guessing that in most countries, the federal law, usurps state or provincial law. But yeah, and so federal law, absolutely prohibits cannabis use. For the most part, cannabis research, because of this law that dates back to 1970 in the Nixon administration, in order to sort of squelch the anti-war movement and to I don't know, throw a little racism into the mix, decided to pass this bill called the Controlled Substance Act, and made cannabis a subject to a really punitive laws that said that you can't research it, you can't use it, you can't study, you can't apply for grants to study it, and so that's federal law. But state law, I mean, the first state to pass a recreational medical marijuana bill was Colorado, and I think the first state to pass a medical law was it was either California or Alaska. I don't recall which one, but basically the idea is that states have their own laws regarding cannabis, whether it be medicinal or recreational. It changes from state to state.
So does each state have a list of medical conditions for which you're allowed to prescribe? Is that how it works in the US?
Yeah, if it's for medical use, each state has what they call qualified conditions.
Okay.
That if you meet these conditions, then you can use medical cannabis. Although there are some states that have passed CBD only,
okay,
where you don't need to see a doctor for that. But in the states where THC is involved, you have to see a physician. You have to, they have to sign off that you really do have a legitimate reason for using, medical cannabis. So.
Okay, so we've got this difference in the federal and state laws. So under federal law, it's a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act, that's cannabis, but there's different access, I guess, legislation in the different states. So what's some of the biggest problems with this federal law regarding cannabis? So you talked about one thing, which was the difficulty of being able to research it. And certainly I do know research colleagues in the state who have battled that difficulty of being able to get hold of cannabis to actually be able to research it, certainly in the past anyway. What are some of the other problems, like banking? I've heard something about that banks won't give loans, or something like that. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So and it's federal banking regulations very clearly state that no bank can harbor any kind of relationship with a client that has anything to do with cannabis. And so it's not just loans. You can't even have a bank. You can't write checks. You can't. Yeah. I mean, and so basically so the cannabis industry in the United States, for the most part, is entirely cash based. And so there's been a industry of basically armed security that goes and takes the cash and takes it and to wherever it's going to go. And so yeah, there is legislation in Congress right now to allow banks to have cannabis customers, but that hasn't passed yet. So yeah, the outlook, in my mind is really, I can't say that I'm an optimist. I mean, we have a Democratic House, Senate, and President, but the enthusiasm and optimism that ushered in Biden's election has really not manifested anything to write home about. Yeah. So, and then the other thing that is interesting about the banking regulations, and this isn't, it's kind of a segue from banking, is that in terms of paying taxes, businesses are able to write off business deductions, but cannabis, because it's a Schedule I substance, businesses aren't allowed to take any kind of business write-off. So I know a guy in Michigan who really straight up guy, doing things all the right way, and he told me that his last tax bill, because of the amount of because of the fact that he can't take any deductions at all, he just written out a check to the IRS for $300,000.
Wow.
But yeah.
Look, I want to also ask you about the Farm Bill 2018. When that came in, how did that change things in relation to hemp-based CBD medicines? So my understanding is that it changed the definition of hemp in some way, but that included the constituents of hemp, and therefore CBD-based medicines that were, made from hemp cultivars were then suddenly not under the Controlled Substances Act. Have I got that right, or is
yeah? I mean, I think that's pretty accurate. So any cannabis products that were made from hemp were deemed to be legal, and as long as the the hemp maintain this arbitrary number of 0.3% THC. Anything above 0.3% THC was considered marijuana and subject to destruction. So there was this huge glut of CBD that hit the market, right? Because CBD was all became all the rage. It was found. I mean, anytime that you can go into a pharmacy or go into a auto or a gas station or petrol station and buy CBD products, that it's everywhere. And so what happened was, because of the glut in the market, there was all this CBD that was just sitting around, and because you can only consume it so much, and interestingly enough, the price of CBD products didn't really fall. I mean, because CBD is actually fairly expensive. You look at a bottle of Charlotte's Web or any CBD product for the most part, and it's certainly not cheap.
How much approximately? I'm interested.
So the last time I checked, you know, I think it's an 8-ounce and an 8-ounce bottle and 8 ounces. So 12 ounces is 255 milliliters. So you can do the math. But 8 ounces of 8x CBD would run you around between $150 and $180.
Okay, so it's expensive, yeah.
Yeah. And so what happened was they decided that, I mean, people are going to be clever, and if there's a loophole, they're going to find it. And they some clever guy who, I don't know if he was a chemist or what, but he said, well, we can take CBD and subject it to some chemical process and move a few bonds around, and we can make Delta 8. And so, and so there became this enormous glut of CBD that was being manufactured into Delta 8 THC. And, as is typically the case, it took a while for the law to catch up and for the DEA to be aware of what was going on. And there were a bunch of people who ended up going to the emergency department because of Delta 8 intoxication. And for people who don't know about Delta 8, I mean, it's not quite as psychoactive as Delta 9. I don't know anybody who's tried it. I've listened to a few clubhouses where people, they rave about it, but and so last time I checked, there were over 600 reports of adverse side effects from Delta 8, and so Delta 8 now became legal. So now you had a cannabis product from hemp that was psychoactive and was still technically legal in states where there wasn't any, where there wasn't THC approval, because of the fact that the Delta 8 was manufactured from CBD, which was grandfathered under the 2018 Farm Bill. It was technically legal, but then DEA came out and said, well, no, that's not, that's not the way to play this game. And, I mean, the bottom line is it's just another example of the inconsistency and the lack of forward thinking with U.S. policy regarding cannabis. I mean, it's pretty, it's pretty silly, and it's cost people a lot of money. People, I mean, it's this whole idea of the failed war on drugs.
So I want to change tack just a little bit now. I'm interested to know what avenues are available for cannabis activists to change the existing cannabis laws.
Yeah, well, I've advocated for some time that people, I mean, that people should become politically active, and I've even gone so far as to say that that because of the lack of movement from the Biden administration, especially in light of the fact that there was all this premature optimism that things were going to change. I mean, after Obama was elected, there was this sense in 2009 that he was going to legalize cannabis, and nothing, that certainly didn't happen. There were some policy changes that occurred during the Obama administration that were somewhat helpful to cannabis, but I mean, like there was a memo that came out in October of 2009 called the Ogden Memo, which said that the Department of Justice wasn't going to really spend much energy pursuing marijuana issues in medical marijuana legal states. That as long as the constituents, the individuals were abiding by state law, they weren't going to bother with it. And so that's what caused, the explosion of enthusiasm and demand, for cannabis in the United States, because everybody thought, well, this is the beginning of the end of prohibition. But then I think it was November of 2010, there was another memo that came out, one that's less well known, called the Hague Memo, which basically said that all dispensaries are illegal, full stop. And that memo then precipitated a number of raids in California, Montana, and Washington on, I believe it was March 14th, 2011. So, yeah, and so I've because these are laws, and laws need to be changed by, politicians need to vote on different laws, and the only way that people are going to, politicians are going to be responsive is to make it a, campaign issue. And so, you could have rallies, which don't happen very often. But basically my feeling was that if people were really serious about cannabis activism and wanted things, changed, they would take this approach that the gay community took in the mid 1980s with the ACT UP movement, right? We wouldn't have the kind of policy towards HIV if it hadn't been for gay activists saying that they weren't going to take it anymore. There were ACT UP demonstrations, and it became they made it a big political issue, but for whatever reason, that has fallen on deaf ears. That I don't know. You can speculate till the cows come home why that hasn't happened, especially again in light of the fact that the movement on cannabis policy in this administration has been so sluggish at best.
Can you explain, we've talked a little bit about sort of, I guess, some of the implications of the US Controlled Substances Act. But I'm interested to know what are some of the implications, over 50 years down the track. And in particular, I'm thinking about people who are languishing in jail still for having possessed cannabis and I've heard, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's that some people are still in jail even in the states where recreational use is now legal. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's quite unfortunately correct. You're absolutely right. According to a cannabis advocacy group called the Last Prisoner Project, they, their claim is that there are over 40,000 Americans in prisons across the United States for violent cannabis offenses. And that does include people that are in prison in states where cannabis is legal. There have been people that have been arrested and in jail for working at a medical marijuana dispensary in a legal state. There are, there's another, aside from the Last Prisoner Project, there's another organization called freedomgrow.org, which is another smaller group that is working to educate people on, educate the public on such things as jury nullification, where, the jury, if the jury disagrees with the law, for example, somebody's being charged with a nonviolent cannabis offense. Let's say that they possession of a couple ounces of cannabis, and the jury has the option of voting, not guilty, just based upon their their reading of the law, that this is an unjust law, but it's rarely brought into trial. But yeah, it's pretty unfortunate that things are the way that they are here.
So it sounds like the stigma is still alive and well, even though there's been great advances in some respects, medical access in over 33 states. Adult use available in over, I don't know how many states you've got there now, but certainly at least 11 states, could be more. But it sounds like the stigma is still floating around, am I right?
Yeah, no, there's definitely still a stigma around it, and it's kind of hard to wrap your head around the idea that there are, there's so many people in jail for cannabis, and the fact that those states that there is a movement to expunge records of people and just to wipe the slate clean, but in some states people have to pay significant fees to have their records expunged, and if you're a low-income individual is just been released from prison or just making ends meet, I mean, it seems sort of antithetical that that you would have to pay for your own freedom, that you would have to pay to have a governmental wrong righted. I mean, it's I don't know, and the other thing that maybe people don't really realize, and it was shocking to me when I started looking into it, is when you think of countries in the world that imprison their citizens, you would think that it would be the countries that are most repressive that have the biggest prison populations. I would think that places like per capita, or just grossly, North Korea, China, Russia, maybe some of the Islamic countries. But surprisingly and shockingly, the United States has the largest prison population in the world, bar none. And
related to cannabis offences, you mean, or
no, just in general.
In general,
I mean,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But still, I mean, 40,000 people in jail for cannabis related offenses, and again, non-violent cannabis offenses. And it I mean, it feeds into this notion of the prison industrial complex that we have in the United States. Many prisons now are private corporations, and there are contracts awarded to the states award contracts to these prisons, and in return, the state has to keep the prison full, because that's part of the contract, that because it's a corporation, and it needs to maximize its profits, and there are examples of you know, police officers getting rewards, getting incentives for, you know, for convictions. And it's really something that is, you know, at some level quite frightening, especially, you know, in the United States, because, you know, the popular notion, I think, is that, you know, the United States is this bastion of liberty on the planet. And we've done a really nice job of marketing that, but the reality just it's just not so. And it's really, and I would actually direct people to there's a documentary that came out a couple of years ago called 13th, and it's a documentary about the 13th Amendment, which was the abolition of slavery. But it also talks quite extensively about the amendment to the Constitution that came during Reconstruction in order to assuage all the parties involved to get the country united. They 14th Amendment, which conferred that everyone is free and has equal rights, except if you commit a crime. Then if you commit a crime, then you basically forfeit all of your rights as a citizen. And so this is where the idea of racism came in terms of, you know, blacks were free, but you're not free if you've got a criminal record. And so the idea of, you know, imprisoning people for ridiculous crimes, giving them record, and there are a lot of states still that if you have a criminal record, you can't vote, even if you've done your. Yeah, I mean, it just, I don't know. It's just it's kind of crazy, and it you know, it's sort of segues to a comment of Jefferson's, you know, one of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, who said that, you know, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And, you know, this idea that, you know, Americans have gotten lazy. You know, we've become lazy, we've become complacent, and, you know, things that wouldn't be tolerated, you know, I mean, some of the things that happen in the United States, if they happened in France, the whole country would shut down, right? The farmers would come out with their tractors and block the roads, and people would say, no, this is crazy. We're not going to do this. But you know, the United States has, you know, the citizens have caved in terms of their responsibility to maintain a responsible and dynamic democracy. And I mean, I think on some level that was seen on January 6th with the you know, when the Capitol was assaulted by the you know, the Trump protesters. You know, I mean, just things that you would never think of. I mean, like again, I appreciate the fact that that we incorporate words from other countries, but gobsmacked is just such a great word to describe, like, how in the heck did this happen? You know, how did we actually get here? You know, because there's still a lot of people that are in denial that, you know, that you know, where we are in drug policy in general. I mean, it's still this notion, you know, a lot of misconceptions about addiction, that addiction is a moral issue. It's an issue of will, and that, you know, but, you know, despite the data, you know, despite this whole thing that's come out of the opiate crisis, you know, people's attitudes are, you know, seem to be pretty rigid at this point now, and we're in this state right now, in the post 9/11 world, where, it sort of takes after, George Bush's speech after, after 9/11, where he was talking to Congress, and it was the famous, you're either with us or against us. You're either on our team or you're our, and that polarization has infiltrated almost every aspect of American culture. And it is for me, someone who is old enough to remember, a country before 9/11, it's absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's really difficult to have, respectful, thoughtful discussions where you have a disagreement with anybody. I mean, it's just, it's kind of crazy, and it's super unfortunate, but it is what it is. And so, and same with, I mean, cannabis is, I mean, you got people, you got, if we're going to have a discussion about Delta 8, you get to Delta 8 people and they're like, no, Delta 8's the greatest thing going, and it's all clean, and it's this and it's that. And the people who will say that, cannabis is, is a miracle drug, and that there's no downsides to it. I mean, the idea of any kind of thoughtful discussion about things is really, I mean, it's almost become dangerous to have a thoughtful, respectful discussion with people who disagree with each other. I mean, it's really,
that's a shame. That's a shame if you feel it's got to that point. Mike, I just want to, I guess, end now with giving you a crystal ball. Now, if you had that crystal ball in front of you and you're looking at what's going to happen with the cannabis industry within the next, let's say, 10 years, what's your prediction here?
10 years from now, where do I see the cannabis industry?
In the US in particular.
Yeah, in the US. Let me say that I really want to be an optimist. I don't want to be a doom and gloomer, but considering the fact that there's so much money flooding into the cannabis industry from big businesses, big tobacco, big alcohol, I see it as becoming a big corporate marketplace. And I think that there was some hope that you could have mom and pop cannabis shops. You have like a craft cannabis industry, like you have the craft beer industry, right? Or craft cider. I guess I just don't see that happening. I'd like to think that 10 years from now, the Controlled Substance Act will be ruled null and void, and all the plant-based substances, including cannabis, such as psilocybin, peyote, mescaline, would all be rendered, legal substances. I mean, you've got control. You've got phase 2, phase 3 studies going on with cannabis-based products. I mean, there's, the other thing is, it's just great because the things for the Controlled Substance Act, there are 3 boxes that need to be checked. First, it needs to be addictive, and by and large, none of these substances that we're talking about, cannabis, psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, peyote, mescaline, none of them are addictive. I mean, clearly none of them are addictive. I mean, some people have problems with, there's a thing called cannabis use disorder, where people, and so that there is a subpopulation of people that might have a problem with it, but not in any relation compared to like alcohol, tobacco, or opiates.
Sure.
And then the other box is that a Schedule 1 substance can't have any has been shown not to have any medical potential, no medical value. And clearly all these substances have robust, clinical potential for a lot of different. And then the last box to be checked to be a Schedule 1 substance is that the compound is dangerous even in the hands of a physician, a qualified physician. And again, nothing could be further from the truth with these substances. So basically you've got a law that's imprisoned, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals in the past 50 years, and lives that have been completely destroyed, for a law that is completely bogus. I mean, it's just a lie that's being perpetuated, and it's really unfortunate. And I appreciate the opportunity, to spread the word that this is a real problem. And I mean, we we don't have a lot of problems in the world already, right? But
that's right. Yeah, look, I thank you very, very much for your time, Michael, and your great knowledge and ideas. I think we've covered an awful lot there, and I've certainly learned a lot more about what's happening in the US. We've had some other, I guess, podcasts where we cover the Australian scene. So for those viewers, you can go to the iccm.co and have a look at our other podcasts that we've had in the past and the future, and also have a look at our education platform for those of you who are healthcare practitioners and who want to learn a little bit more about the evidence base. We have over 20 different international experts. We've got over 50 videos in our video library at the moment, so check us out. So Michael, thanks very, very much for your time. Very much appreciated.
Yep, thanks a lot. Have a great day. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye.